Okay, so this is the first time I'm recording a lecture. I don't know if this is going to work out. Hopefully it does. If you guys have any problems with it, let me know, and I will try to adjust it next time. Or if it really fails, then I just won't ever do it again. We won't talk of it. So, all right. So before the break, so this is what we're going for. And I'm real quick just going to kind of give you guys a tour of the scene. This isn't the finished scene, but this is, I'm going to guess this is where we'll get to by the end of next week, but who knows. So we have a street here, and the street is actually made up of just this section and then one other section for the corner. And this section is mirrored across the street, and then it's using something called an array modifier, which I am going to cover a bit more in depth very shortly. This sidewalk area is just basically a big plane. It's got a couple of different loop cuts. There's a little dip here for the footpath, and some loop cuts for the corner. This is a very roughed in street light and post. It's just a 8 vertice or vertex circle extruded up and scaled a few different ways, and very crude, just blocked in stoplight. This is by no means the final form, and probably when we go in and model this properly, there's a good chance we'll just start fresh, but this is just good to have as a form to check our scale and make sure we're not way off base. Over here, this is the base of a street light. If I go to the actual scene, again, this is the local on Nicollet and 10th. This is the actual address. I encourage you to bring this up in Google Maps so you can kind of explore the space on your own. It's nice because I can go down the street and see things from different angles. I can zoom in and see close-ups of different details that I want further clarification on. And I think this is actually, oops, didn't want to do that. Actually I don't want to say easy or simple, but certainly a manageable scene to do. As overwhelming as that might appear at first, I think it is actually pretty manageable once you break it up into parts. And that's what we're going to work on first. Here's the trash can, which is actually a pretty finished trash can. This uses the array modifier for this kind of bar detail. Is just one bar modeled, and then there's an array that spins it around and copies it to get that form. And then it's just a few different cylinders that are extruded for the other forms. And then the building, which is probably maybe the biggest and most intimidating part. It's right now it's a couple different sections. This front kind of patio door area is just this section, and I broke this up. It's mirrored, which you can't actually see. Oh, it's mirrored across this. So it's mirrored across to the other side of the building, and then there's also an array modifier, which is duplicating it 3 times on each side. So it's really cutting down on the amount of work and the amount of modeling that you have to do. These windows are in the other mesh. These were all extruded at the same time, so they're the same size. And this is just kind of roughing out the forms and getting the forms close and making sure my proportions are right before I move in and do any more detailed modeling. If you look back to the source, this top floor gets kind of detailed, and we're going to do our best to replicate some of this. And when we do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to separate the top floor from the building so that when I add loop cuts, it doesn't go all the way down to the bottom floor, because there's no need to further complicate the bottom floor geometry as we're doing some of the details up top. There's also a good chance when we do like this cutout here for these kind of false column facade, that this will be a separate object in itself that we'll just kind of lay on top of it. As you look around this scene, think about all the simple forms that there are in starting points. You know, the trash can is obviously a bunch of cylinders. This light post is basically cubes that are scaled spheres for the lights. As you see for this street light here, it's some cubes, and then these are just for the housing of the lights. They're just cylinders, and I deleted one of the faces to leave that opening. Let's see. Whoops. Whoa. Let's get that back. There. Okay. And, you know, eventually we'll probably do some variation. We don't need to pack in 20 tables and 80 chairs into this little space, but we might do a couple of chairs in a table and spread them out and fill out the scene, because as we get into shading and texturing, that'll be an opportunity to make it feel like an actual space. So let's start modeling, shall we? First thing we need to do, I'm going to keep this open on a separate tab. If you want to pull this up in Google Maps, I recommend it. 990 Nicollet Mall, Minneapolis. If you know where it is, you can just keep zooming in on it, and you'll find it. Okay, so I've got a new scene. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do with my new Blender file is I'm going to save it. And I'm going to save it in my storage, 3D Basics, and I've got Nicollet Mall. And I will save this as street scene underscore 01, because it's going to be the first one. And then I like to also, after that, add a little bit of detail as far as what stage in the process this is. So I'm going to call this street scene 01 underscore blocking. Okay. And I will hit enter. And now I have it saved. Remember to save often. Next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to organize my scene a little, or my layout a little bit. I don't need this timeline at the bottom. We're not going to be doing any animation with this, and if we do at some point, we can always add it back. So down in this lower left-hand corner, where you've got these 3 stripes in the corner, I'm going to click and just drag that down, and the timeline is going to disappear. It's going to give me a little bit more space. On your monitors, it's not as much of an issue, but on my smaller monitor, it certainly is, and I need all the space I can get. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my user preferences, which is Command comma, and in my add-ons there's a layers. Oh, that is not how you spell layers, and they don't seem to have it in this version. Okay, never mind. There was an add-on for naming layers and keeping better track of them, but I don't see it, so never mind. Okay. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select my lamp. I'm going to select my camera. I'm going to hit M to move it to a different layer, and I'm just going to move it down here to layer 11. I don't need it in the scene or in the way, but I'm not going to delete it, because if I want to see it in a rendered view, I still need a little bit of light and obviously a camera to render anything. So that's out of the way. Now I have just a cube in space. Now I'm going to look at this file, and alright, so as we look at our scene, the first thing that I want to do is I want to kind of establish a sense of space and place. So I'm going to start with the ground, and the first thing on the ground I'm going to start with is the street. And the way that we're going to do the street, as I said, is we're just going to model a section. We're going to model one lane and just one about 15-20 foot section, and then we can mirror that across and use an array modifier to copy it down the street. So as I look at this, and it's better to look at this in the street view, I know the Nicollet Mall, the lanes are pretty narrow. I guess they're about 9 feet across from center to the edge. Okay, so as I look in street view, and from the fact that I was just on Nicollet a couple days ago. I know these lanes are pretty narrow. I did do a little bit of research and found that lane widths vary between 9 feet and 15 feet. This is definitely on the smaller side of that. So I figure we'll just use 9 feet for the width. And the reason for that, if you come back to Blender, these Blender units on average represent 1 meter, and 1 meter is pretty close to 1 yard, and there's 3 feet in a yard, so 3 Blender units, pretty close to 9 feet, close enough for our purposes. Again, we just want to get it close, and we can adjust things as necessary so that it looks good to our eye and the proportions are correct. Okay, so what I'm going to start with, I'm going to delete the default cube, X and delete, and I'm going to start with a plane. So I'm going to add mesh plane. Let me turn on my screencast keys so you can follow along. Okay, so I've added my default plane, and the very first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to name it. So I'm going to go up to my outliner, and I'm going to control click on plane, and I'm going to name this street. Okay. We need to get in the habit of naming often, naming early. It's going to make things a lot simpler as we get more and more objects in our scene. Okay. So I'm in top view, number pad 7 to go into top view, and I want it to be 3 feet wide. So right now it's 2 units. I want it 3 units on each way, or 6 units total. So I can scale it, and I only want to scale it right now in the Y direction. I'm just worried about the width right now. So I'm going to hit S to scale, Y to constrain it to the Y direction, and I'm going to type in 3. Okay, so now I've got it 3 units wide in each direction. Also, I mentioned that this was done with both an array modifier and a mirror modifier. So I want to set up that mirror modifier right now. And I will do that by adding an edge loop right here at the center. Left click to add it, and I'm going to right click to keep it in the center. Okay, so I have my loop cut, and now I can select, I'm going to select this half of the street, and I'm going to hit X to delete the vertices. And I'm going to go to my modifiers, which is this wrench, add modifier, mirror. Now, by default, the mirror modifier is set to mirror across the X axis, and I want it to mirror across the Y axis. So I'm going to uncheck X and check Y, and now I've got it going in the direction that I want it. I'm also going to click on clipping so that the vertices in the center do not separate when I move them. Alright, so the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to worry about the width, and I just want to do a section of road. Again, as you look at the reference, you can kind of see on the road there are seams. And when we get to the texturing phase, we can only, if we do this in sections, we'll only have to texture one section, and then all of it will be textured. And if the sections are big enough, we won't notice the repeating pattern. So that's the reasoning behind this. So I'm going to select everything by double tapping A. You'll only see the top half selected, but the mirror modifier will affect the bottom half as well. And then I'm going to scale this time in the X direction. And if you look at the bottom left of your 3D view, you can see your kind of key, if you will, telling you which direction is which, and the X is the red. So I'm going to hit S to scale, X to lock it to the X axis, and we'll do about a 20-25 foot section. So I'm going to hit 4 to scale it up 4 times and hit enter. So that makes the width 8 Blender units, which if you figure that each one of those is 3 feet, it's about 24 feet. That's a pretty good length of road. Okay, so that's the start of our road. Okay, so I've got the length and I've got the width. The next thing I want to concern myself with is the curb. Now I'm not going to worry about this dip for the sidewalk. That's going to be kind of the end cap section that also contains this curve. But I will be focusing on kind of this part right here. And as I look at this in relation to the rest of the road, I kind of figure that this gutter section here is about a foot wide, as is this top flat yellow, and it's maybe 4 inches high. That's a pretty standard kind of feel for a curb. And again, the way that we're modeling this, we will have the freedom to very easily change the dimensions if we want to. Okay, so this, just to orient you guys in the scene, this will be down the road, and then the sidewalk will be here, and then the building will be over here. Yeah. So I want to extrude for this, for the curb and the gutter. I'm going to select these top 2 vertices. I'm going to do this in top view. As you extrude, if you're in, for instance, if I'm in the top view and I extrude, no matter where I move, the new vertices are going to stay on that plane. Okay, if I come back around to side view, you can see they're all level, and that's because I did it in top view. If I did this just kind of in a 3D view and started moving things around, now it's all over the place and it's a little bit harder to control. And this is where some of you may run into issues with your dining room set. So it might seem like I get a little anal about my view placement, but it's for good reason. It keeps my scene organized, and it minimizes the amount of adjustments and tweaks and cleanup work that I have to do. So from top view, I'm going to select these top 2 vertices, and I'm going to extrude them, and I want to keep it in the Y direction only. Okay, so extrude, E to extrude, Y in the Y direction, and I want about a foot, which means I want about a third of this large blender unit. So I'll go right about here. Okay, so there's the gutter. That would be this kind of concrete colored section. Okay, one note, if your mirrored road surface isn't meeting in the center, okay, so let's say you've got a little bit of a gap here, make sure clipping is enabled, and then G to move it, and then the Y direction, and just push it into the center, and then clipping will kick in and link them together. Okay, so you'll have a solid mesh. Okay, so back in top view, I have extruded for this gray part of the gutter. Okay, now I want to extrude up for the lip of the curb. And the way that I'm going to do that, I'm going to go into side view. 3 to go into side view. If I rotate it a little bit, you can kind of see my orientation in relation to everything else. So 3 to go into side view, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit, scroll wheel up to zoom in. I'm going to hit E to extrude again. This time I want to extrude it up. So I'm going to hit Z to lock it to the Z axis. And I'm going to go about one of the smaller squares. That's roughly the equivalent of 4 inches. It's a good depth. And then, okay, so I've extruded up for the curb about one of the little blender units, a sub-unit, if you will. Now I want to extrude over for the width of the top of the curb. And that looks about the same as the width of the gutter. So I'm going to go back into top view, and I'm going to extrude again locking to the Y axis, and we'll go to about the same width as we did before. So these are, from here to here is about the same as from here to here. Okay? So now if I orbit my view around a little bit, I can see I have a very simple, basic section of street. Okay, I now have my street section, and the next thing that I want to do is I want to make this continue on a little bit longer. So now we're going to use the array modifier, and I'm going to tab to go into object mode. I'm just going to go to a separate layer to explain this array modifier to you first. So if I add in we'll start with just a simple UV sphere, and I'll bring the segments down just so it's not too fast. Okay, so I've got this sphere, and if I want to have multiple spheres, I could hit Shift-D to duplicate, move it along the x-axis a certain number, and just keep doing that. But the problem here is that if I want to change one of them, then, or if I want to change them all, I have to change them individually. Or if I want to change the spacing, I have to move them individually. There is a better way, and that is, if I select my sphere, adding a array modifier, which is right up here in the generate column. I add that, and immediately I get a second sphere. And I have a bunch of settings here on the side. I have my fit type, so you can have the number of replications be a fixed number, which in this case is set to 2. You can also have it fit a certain length. So if you have a curve or a line, you could have it fit that length, which is good for doing things like rope and chain. You could also have it fit a curve. Variations on a theme there. But for now, we're just going to worry about fixed count. Next, we have a constant offset and we have a relative offset. By default, it's a relative offset of 1. Constant offset is based off of global units. So this one, if I set the constant offset in the x direction to 1, you can see that the sphere is 1 blender unit. The origin of the second sphere is 1 blender unit over from the first one. If I go to relative offset, it is 1 of the total dimension, or the total width of the sphere. Okay, so it'll butt up right next to it. It's the 1 refers to the overall width of the initial object. So matter if I select this sphere, no matter how big I make it, the second sphere will scale accordingly. And now I can do that in the X, in the Y, or in the Z direction. You can also have your object be offset based off of another object, which we will do later when we get to the trash can. I don't want to confuse you too much right away. We also have a merge option, which we can merge the subsequent objects. Then we have something called a start cap and an end cap. So if you were modeling like a tube and you wanted the ends to be different but fit together, you could model separate objects and just have those automatically applied to the end of your array. We can adjust the count. You see here, any number you want, and no matter what I do to this first object, if I wanted to extrude, they all function the same way. So the array modifier is a very powerful modifier, and it can really shorten your work if you're doing anything with any amount of repetition. Fences, chains, there's some spherical things. The trash can we're going to do later will use the array modifier and make things very easy to not only make quickly but also modify quickly without having to get too bogged down in complex geometry. So I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to jump back over to layer 1, and I'm going to select my road, and I'm going to apply that array modifier. Now, by default, I'm going to collapse my mirror so I can only see my array right now. By default, again, it has a relative offset set to 1, which is going in this direction along the x-axis. And I want it to go the other way, because if I look at my reference, you can see the road continues down this way, and it has a corner here. I don't want to worry about that corner right now. We'll do that next. But right now I just want to worry about adding some more to the road. So the way that I'm going to do that is simply changing it from a positive 1 to a negative 1. And now it's going the other way. Okay. And again, if you're modeling a street scene on your own and you want the street to continue for a while, just up the count, and now we've got a very long road. And if I go into perspective, it'll actually start feeling like a long road. Okay. I'm going to leave the count at 3. That is long enough for our purposes, and actually I'll bring that down to 2 for now. We can make it longer later if we need to, because again, this is what's referred to as non-destructive modeling. I'm not committing to this form. I have that freedom still between the mirror modifier and the array modifier. I have plenty of freedom to modify the mesh without having to get, again, bogged down in complex topology, because really this is all I have. The whole road, this is all made up of just 10 vertices. Okay, very powerful stuff. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to make, sorry, that's something on my other monitor. I want to make this the end cap, the corner of the street. So the way that I'm going to do that is, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select my street in object mode. This is important. Select it in object mode. I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate it, and I'm going to right click to leave it in the same place. Okay. Now, okay, so I have a duplicate. With this duplicate, this is going to be the curve of the street, the bend, the corner. I don't need the array modifier. I will leave the mirror modifier for now. The next thing that I want to do is I want to move this over along the x-axis, just kind of out of the way so I can tell what I'm working on. And what we're going to do with this is we're going to model this as the corner, and then we're going to go back to our original street and specify this as the end cap, and it'll automatically be applied there. Okay? So, okay, so now that I have a duplicate, the first thing that I want, well, it's not the first thing because I've already done a couple other things, but before I forget, I want to rename this. And I'm going to control click in the outliner on street 001, and I'm going to name this street underscore corner. Okay. This way, one, I know what it is, and two, it'll stay in the outliner. It'll stay next to the other street, so I can find them when I need them quickly. Okay. Okay. So I have my duplicated street section. I deleted the array modifier, and it still has the mirror modifier. So what I want to do with this is I want to take this curb section, and I want it to, I'll go to top view, I want this to kind of curve around like this, like a street corner. Okay, we all know what that looks like. The way that I'm going to do this, and you're going to need to pay attention very carefully, because there's a specific set of steps that has to happen to make this work correctly. There is a tool, and it is called the spin tool here on the side. Okay, if any of you have accidentally hit Alt-R, you have seen this, and probably not in a good way. In a good way, it's very cool. So, there's a few things that the spin tool depends on to work properly. First of all is your viewport. It will spin around the direction that your viewport is looking. So for this, we want to be in the top view. Okay, it will not work the right way if you're not in the top view. So 7 on the number pad to be in the top view. And again, I'm in orthographic view, which if you're in perspective, as indicated in the top left of your window, hit 5 on the number pad and you'll go to orthographic view. The next thing that this spin modifier is dependent on is the 3D cursor. And that is, right now it's at the origin, or at least it should be, unless you left click at random and throwing caution to the wind. But, so wherever this 3D cursor is where this spin will take place. And where I want this 3D cursor is going to be right about in that area. And we can position this a little bit more exactly in a second. So to exactly place the 3D cursor, I'm going to introduce a couple of, or another command that we haven't dealt with yet. I am going to right click on this last vertex, and then I'm going to hit Shift S and cursor to selected. That will position the 3D cursor exactly on that vertex. Okay, Shift S. Okay, Shift S. Yes. I believe it's in the menus here somewhere as well. Huh? Not the offset. All right. So my 3D cursor is right on this vertex, and what that does is it lines it up both in the Z direction that I want it to be in, and it also lines it up, to go back to top view, in the X direction. But it's not, I want it out here somewhere, so I have to move it in the Y direction. And instead of kind of clicking around and trying to get close, if I hit N to bring up my properties, I've got this section right here that says 3D cursor. And what I can do is I can move this, my Y value, to right about where I want the 3D cursor. And in this case, I'm just going to type in 5. Actually, that's, well, maybe 6. Let me zoom out so I get a better sense of perspective. No, actually, I think 5 is better. Okay. Okay, so I moved it out a little bit, but it's still level with my curb, and it's still even with the end of it, which is what I want. Okay, now's where it gets cool. I'm going to select the parts that I want to spin around, which are these 4 vertices. Okay? Got these 4 end vertices selected. Then, in top view, this matters, in top view, I'm going to click spin right here. And this is what I get. And then I'm not going to touch anything, which means you should not touch anything, because there's a couple of settings we need to change. It's in the spin is located in the tool panel right here on the side. Okay, before I do anything else, in my tool properties, or I could hit F6 to bring them up, I've got some options that I need to clarify. The first thing is the angle. As you can see, this is spinning the opposite way that I want it to. So in my properties, which again is at the bottom of the tool panel, or F6 to bring it up, I'm going to change it from 90 to -90. And now it's spinning the right way. Okay? The next thing that I'm going to do, right now it's doing 9 steps. You can change that to as few or as many as you want. You can get away with 3, which is what I did in the practice, but I'm actually going to bump this up to, we'll go with 5, I think. We'll be good. Okay, so what it's done is it's basically extruded around a center pivot point, and has very quickly made what could be a complicated form to make another way fairly easily, but it does require a very specific process to get it right. Okay, so we have our spin, and it looks pretty cool, but now we need to extend the rest of the roadway around the corner. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to select these 2 vertices, the kind of the main part of the road, and then from top view I'm going to extrude, and I'm going to extrude just in the X direction, and I'll go out to about here's good. Okay, doesn't have to be exact, but about there, past the end of this curb here. And now what I want to do is I want to connect this curb to the main part of the road, and I want to do this with all quads, and you can see that I don't currently have the geometry here to do that. So here is how I'm going to do it. Alright, so what I'm going to do is, from top view, the first thing I want to worry about is I'm just going to worry about this section right here, and I want to add a quad. So I'm going to add an edge loop, and I'm going to slide it over till it's about even with this other vertex. Doesn't have to be exact, but pretty close. And I'm going to place that there. Now, if I just make these a face, that leaves me a triangle, and I don't want a triangle. In this instance, it would be okay to have a triangle. This road isn't going to be deforming. But I think just for best practices, let's worry about keeping this all quads. That way it'll be a lot easier, and it'll become habit down the line. So I'm going to undo filling that face. And the way that I'm going to do this is I'm just going to select these two vertices, and I'm going to hit F, and now that creates an edge right there. It doesn't fill the face, but it creates an edge. And with this edge still selected, I'm going to subdivide it. And right here in the toolbar, you've got Subdivide. You can also access Subdivide if you prefer key commands by hitting W to bring up your specials menu and Subdivide. Okay. And what that does is it adds a vertex in the middle. Okay. Instead of that being one edge, it is now two edges. And with this vertex, I'm just going to move it out along the x-axis just a little bit. So now it's a diamond. This is it's called a diamond quad, and you'll see these fairly often in modeling, especially when you're going from more dense geometry to less dense geometry. Okay. Now that I have my vertex moved out, now I have this diamond quad, and I can select the 4 vertices and hit F to fill that. Okay. The next thing that I want to do is I'm going to select this end vertice, and I'm going to extrude this out, again, from top view so that it stays level on a level plane. I'm going to extrude that out just a little bit so it's about even, and I'm going to fill that as well. Alright, so I'm going to select this edge, and I realized I moved this out a little bit further than I needed to, so I'm just going to hit G and X and just push it back a little bit. Doesn't need to be out quite that far. Yeah. Okay. Now, actually, you know what? I can move that back even more. I'm going to move it back to about here. I'll move this down a little bit. I'm just trying to keep the quads and the vertices fairly lined up and even. Now I have a very obvious quad here that I can fill in. So select those 4 vertices and hit F to fill that in. And then I want to go up. I'm just going to follow this around for the last 3 sections. And the way that I'm going to do that, very similar to when we did the wine glass, I'm going to select this one vertex. I'm going to hold down Control, and again, from top view so that they all stay level, I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm going to click about here, and I'm going to click about here, and I'm going to click about here. And now I can fill in these faces with quads. Okay. Now I go back and I have a corner of a street. And later on, if we want to, just to demonstrate this, if we want to extend the street the other way, all I have to do is select this edge loop and just extrude it out, and now the curb continues on down the road. Okay, so we've got more or less a curb. This is certainly good enough for our purposes. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this as an end cap to this array. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to select our corner object in object mode. I'm going to hit M, and I'm going to move it over to layer 6 because I don't need it in the scene right now, but I want to keep it so that I can edit it later. Then I'm going to select our original street, and I'm going to go to my array modifier, and I'm going to select end cap. I'm going to click on it and choose street corner, and you see it added it to the end, which is not what we want. So do we add it as a start? Yeah, so add it as a start cap. Now it automatically lines it up with the end of the array, and if we click merge as well, it'll merge all the pieces together. So if we decide to apply a subdivision surface modifier to it, everything will remain linked up as one solid, pretty looking object. So there is our street. Another advantage of adding it to the array modifier, because you could just take the corner object and just move it so it was right next to the street and everything would look fine. But another advantage of this is if I decide that I want this section of street to be a little bit shorter, whoops, then the end cap will stay with it automatically. It's, again, a wonderful way to save a bit of work and keep things looking clean and tidy. Okay, so there's one more thing that I want to add to this corner object. So I'm going to go back over to the layer that I moved it to, and I'm just going to select it and go into edit mode. If we go back to our reference, you can see that there's a dip down in the curb where the sidewalk, the crosswalk is, and that's what I want to add next. So to do that, I'm going to go into top view on my corner object, and I'm going to add in a couple of loop cuts. I'm going to add in 2. I'm using my scroll wheel to change it to 2. And I'm going to left click to add them, and then it puts me into edge slide mode, and I'm going to slide them over about here. Is, I think, probably pretty good. And yeah, that'll be good. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add in 2 more, and I'm going to add them inside of the 2 that I just added. Okay, and then I'm going to right click to keep them in the center. And I want to push these a little bit closer to these other 2 loop cuts. So instead of selecting each one and double tapping G to slide it over, what I can do is I can select both of them, and I can scale them out along the x-axis, and it'll move them both evenly, the same amount. And I'm going to move it to about, I think there looks good. So what I've done is I've given myself the geometry necessary to flatten this curb. And what I'm going to do to flatten the curb is I'm just going to select these top 4 vertices on the inside here, and I'm going to hit G and Z to move them down, and I'm going to move them, actually I'm not going to select all 4. I'm going to select the back 2 first, and I'm going to move them down GZ just a little bit, and then I'm going to select, hold on a second, I'm going to select these 2 vertices, and I'm going to GZ and move them down, whoops, move them down just a little bit, and I'm going to select these front 2 on the curb, and then GZ and move them down most of the way, not all the way, but most of the way, because eventually we will probably add a subdivision surface modifier, which will smooth this out a little bit. But right now, if I hit tab to go into object mode, you can see that I've got a nice even dip there, which will work well for our purposes. And then if I go back to my primary layer with the full street, you notice that the change hasn't been added, and to get that to refresh, just tab in and out of edit mode, and there's the dip. Alright, so we have basically our street is done. If we want to see more of the street or add more of the street, what we can do is, first of all, we can increase the count of the array, and the street will extend off into the distance. And then if we want to fill in this part here, we can go back to our street corner object and just extend the geometry. But for the most part, the camera won't be looking that way, mostly. I think this is the view and the orientation of the camera that we're going to primarily concern ourselves with, just to kind of narrow down the scope of the work a little bit. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do, we have the street, is let's get this sidewalk just kind of roughed in. And this is going to be a very quick and simple thing. It's just going to be a plane. We can come back and add detail and contour to it later. But for now, I just want to get that sidewalk plane in. Now, if we think about this sidewalk, it's going to be just a little bit more complicated than your average plane. And the reason for that is it has to fit inside of this curve, and this little dip here is also going to be affected by it. So what I'm going to do is, instead of just adding a plane and subdividing it and shaping it, I can take a shortcut and actually start from this edge. So if I go over to my street corner object, which is on layer 6, and tab to go into edit mode, I'm going to select this edge loop, which is option right click to select the edge loop, and it's going to select this whole edge, which is exactly what I want. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Shift D to duplicate that. So now I just have this floating edge in vertices. I'm going to right click to keep it in the same spot. And then here's a new command. I'm going to hit P to separate. And I'm going to separate selection. Okay. Now it looks like it's disappeared and it's deselected. I'm going to hit Tab to go back into object mode. And I'm going to click where I know that edge is. And it's given me street corner 001. Okay, that's how I know I've got the duplicate selected. Now I also see that I have, if I go into wireframe, I can see that I have an edge selected on the opposite side because of the mirror modifier. And that's okay, but we don't really need it. We're not going to worry about that side of the street. So I'm just going to delete that modifier. We're only concerned about this side of the sidewalk. So I've got my starting point for the sidewalk, but I'm on layer 6 right now. I want to be on my home layer, so I'm going to, with this selected, I'm going to first rename it. I'm going to rename it to sidewalk. Okay. That's control click in the outliner on the name and type in sidewalk. And then I'm going to hit M, well, with my cursor over the 3D view. I'm going to hit M to move it back to layer 1. And then I'm going to go to layer 1. Okay. Now it's where I want it to be. And what I can do is I can hit Tab to go into edit mode. And you can see it's slightly offset, so what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to move it over so it lines up properly. Okay. Okay, so in order to get this over, I could eyeball it. I could go into top view and hit A to select everything and just zoom in and move it along the x-axis and try to get it close. And I could get pretty close, but there might be a little gap which you wouldn't notice until you started shading and lighting it, and then you just get a little sliver of either darkness or just kind of weirdness, and I don't want that. So what I can do is I can use snapping. And snapping is enabled. One way to do it is down here there's this magnet icon, and if I click it, the magnet turns red and snapping is enabled. Now you can snap to a few different things. By default, it snaps to increments of the grid. Now this doesn't mean that it snaps to the grid, but it will snap in those increments. So with this enabled, I hit G and X to lock it to the x-axis. It will snap in increments. So it's moving the size of these little squares, but it's not snapping to it because it didn't start from a grid line. This can be useful for some things, but until Blender implements a snap to grid function, it's more frustrating. What I want to do is I want to snap it to this edge. So my other options for snapping, I have increment, vertex, edge, face, and volume, and they will snap to, as they describe the appropriate element. I'm going to snap to vertex because that is the most precise way for me. And now I'm going to hit G to move it along the x-axis, and I'm going to hover my mouse over the vertex I want it to snap to, and you can see it's highlighted. And there it is. Okay, so now it's in position. I'm going to jump to another layer and kind of demonstrate this a little bit clearer because there's a couple of nuances to this that I want you to understand. So I'm going to add in a plane. I'm going to go into edit mode and top view, and I'm going to duplicate the plane. So now I have two planes. And if I want to snap this one plane to the other plane with vertex snapping, I still have snapping on, and I still have it enabled to vertex. As I move it and hover my mouse over the verts, it will snap to the closest vertex. Now, if I want to snap this corner here to this top vertex, what I have to do first is I have to move it closer to it because it's going to snap closest to closest. So now if I move it, it'll snap to the corner. So if you're not getting the expected results, then you might have to first move your object in the general vicinity of where you want it, and then you can enable snapping and get it exactly where you want it. Okay? Remember, the snapping button is this magnet. Another way, and the way that I use it more often, is if you hold down Control while you're moving, it will enable snapping as long as you have control held down. Okay, so I can move it around. Let's see. I suppose I have to do it one at a time. G to move it, and then I can hold down control and choose it, but it doesn't leave snapping on, which is a more useful way for me because I don't always want to have snapping on. So that's generally how snapping works. The more you play with it, the more you'll get comfortable with it and understand how it works. And as we go through this street scene, we will be using it a lot, so you will get comfortable with it, whether you like it or not. Okay, you're going to hear so many of me just saying, okay, on this recording. I have my edge duplicated. I've named it Sidewalk. It's in position. Now I want to actually fill in the sidewalk. And the first thing I'm going to do is to give myself a little bit of depth. From top view, I'm going to hit E to extrude this edge, and I'm going to move it right about there. I think is probably a pretty good distance. Now some of these things are skewed a little bit, and the way that I'm going to fix that is with more snapping. I still have Vertex Snapping enabled, and I snap by holding control. If you prefer, you can just hit the magnet button and keep snapping on all the time. But what I want to do is I want to move this vertex down so that it's even with this edge. So I'm going to hit G to move it, and I'm going to lock it to the Y axis by hitting Y, and I'm going to snap it to that vertex. So now it's perfectly even with the other vertex. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing with these 4 vertices right here. These ones in the corner are fine. It's giving me a nice smooth transition. I have no problem with that. But these 5 I do want to move over so that these lines here, instead of being a slant, are all vertical, and that is not even close to a vertical line. So apologies for that. There's one. Okay, get rid of that. You don't need my poor drawings. So with these 5 on the bottom, I'm going to select, actually I don't know if they will all line up perfectly if I do them all at once, but we'll try. G, X, and I'd say that's close enough for government work anyway. So we'll call that good. Okay. So I'm pretty happy with that. The next thing that I want to do is I want to fill this whole area in here with faces, with quads. And the way that I'm going to do that, delete my grease pencil. Top view. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select this edge here. I don't want to select any of this curve because that's going to take a little bit of maybe special work to make sure that that's all even smooth quads. But I'm going to select this flat part, and I'm going to hit E to extrude, and Y to move it in the Y direction. And I'm gonna, with snapping still enabled, I'm just gonna snap it to the end. Okay, and it's once again perfectly lined up where I want it. Okay, snap back to top view. Now I need to fill in this area, and I don't mind about these quads being a little bit more rectangular, again, because this isn't going to be a deforming mesh. It won't be animated, it's just going to be static. It'll be okay. But I'm going to add in an edge loop. First, just going to add in 1, and I'm going to slide it down roughly even with this vertex there. I'm going to turn snapping off right now. And I'm going to select these 4 vertices and fill that face. Okay, so that leaves me now with this area in here that I need to get all quads out of. And I think the way that I'm going to do that, I'll look this over. Okay, I'm going to try this. Sometimes it just needs a little bit of trial and error. But I'm going to add in an edge loop here. I'm going to add in an edge loop there. And I'm going to right click to keep them in the center, just to keep them evenly spaced. And then let's try this. Let's fill this and then subdivide that edge, and then in top view I'm going to move that out so it stays, whoops, move it out so it stays even, and I'm going to fill that in. Oops. Okay, and then let's see. When we did this corner, I probably should have done like 6 and not 5 or something, but it's a bit late for that, I suppose. Okay, let's maybe fill those in and fill these in. Okay, so now I have 5 and I want 6. So I think what I'll do is I'm going to select this edge loop and I'm just going to move it along the x-axis. I'm going to move that one back. I'm just going to add in another edge loop there. And that is not pretty, but I think that'll do for now. And it'll stay a flat surface, so we should be okay with that. Okay, so I've got that filled in. Now I'm going to select this edge loop here. And here's the really easy part. I'm going to go in top view. I'm just going to E to extrude, X select to the X-axis, and I'm going to just snap it by holding down Control and snap to the edge of the road. And now we have our sidewalk. And there's 2 more things I want to do with this sidewalk. The first, if you notice, because we extruded this from the curb, we have this dip that actually runs the whole length of the sidewalk. And I don't want that. I want it to kind of, I like a little bit of a dip, but by about here, I want this all to be at the full height. So I'm going to select all of these vertices, and if I go into front view and Z, you can kind of see that these are all a little bit lower. I'm going to select them all, and I'm going to hit G and Z to move them up, and I'm going to snap them to a vertex that I know is level with the rest of the sidewalk. Okay. So now you can see I still have a little bit of a ramp up, but the rest of it is all flat and even with the rest of the sidewalk. Okay. Now the last thing that I want to do with this sidewalk is I want to just color it to separate it a little bit visually so that as I'm working with it I have a better sense of space. And the way that I'm going to do that, the first thing I'm going to do is up here at the top, my render engine. I'm going to change it to cycles render, because when it does render, it's just going to give better, more realistic results, especially with the lighting. So once that says cycles render, I'm going to go over to my materials properties, which is this little circle just to the right of the modifiers. I'm going to click new to add a new material. I'm going to name this first. I'm going to name it sidewalk. And then I'm going to change the color to something. It'll look like pink, but then I'm going to move this down and make it like a darker pinkish color. And then you won't see the change in the viewport until you go to settings and your viewport color. And then I'm just going to use the eyedropper and grab the other color so it's the same. And actually I'm going to make that a little bit lighter. That might be a little bit too dark. That's too light. Let's go there and then grab that color. Okay. Alright, so now I can tell the difference between my sidewalk and my street. Alright, so we've managed to get our street and our sidewalk. The last thing that I want to do is going to be something that's going to help us as we move forward with the rest of our modeling, and that is setting the camera in a position that we can use as reference as we refer back to our initial reference image. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to just navigate my view around. So middle click and drag to orbit, and if I do middle click and shift I can pan my view around. But I just want to move it around. Hit 5 to go into perspective view because that's how the camera sees things. I can use the scroll wheel to zoom. I can pan and orbit. I'm just gonna get it set, maybe like this, Okay, and then I'm gonna go and say object, not object, I'm sorry, view, cameras. I lied. That is not it. I think I need to. All right, I'm going to go view, align view, and align active camera to view. And that'll snap the camera in right there. Now my camera's on another layer, so I'm going to hold down Shift and select the layer that my camera is on. That way I will be able to select my camera. And you can see the camera snaps in, but it snaps in a little bit too zoomed. So with my camera selected, which you can select in the outliner just by clicking camera, I'm going to hit G to move it, and then if I double tap Z, it'll move it along the local kind of Z axis, which is like kind of like dollying in and out. And I'm just going to pull it back a little bit so I can see a little bit more of my world. And I'm also going to rotate it along the Z axis, so R and then Z, and just kind of get it lined up pretty close to our reference image. And then if we look at the reference image with Google Street View, they tend to, or Google uses a wide angle lens. That way, as you orbit around, you can kind of see everything. But it also gives a little bit of a distortion. And I want to replicate that a little bit because it'll make referring back to our reference image and checking on our progress a little bit, it'll make them line up a little bit more. So again, with my camera selected, you'll notice in our properties panel, we've got a little camera icon now where the materials used to be. I'm going to click on that, and I've got a focal length option right here at the top. I'm just going to change that to 24 and hit enter. And now my camera is roughly where I want it. Okay. Now if you hit Shift Z, it'll go to rendered view, which you can also go to. There's a little sphere next to object mode, and you've got your different viewport shading options. And so in rendered view, it'll give you a preview of what it looks like with some light. Okay, which will look cooler as we add more things to the scene, because right now we just have a road and a sidewalk. So that's it for the progress that we're going to make on this today. Next time we will, let me Z-tab and go back to this. Next time we will work on, that's not what I wanted. There we go. We'll get the building kind of roughed in, and we'll probably work on the trash can. Yeah. So I look forward to our progress.